And once we find who they are, we have someone go around to their house, knock on their door, and pay them a visit and say, stop it.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Uncensored Direct Marketing. Today, I have Al Evans from Takedown Czar. So Al, as you can see, is not appearing on camera. So for our listeners, we also have a YouTube channel, if ever you're on YouTube, where you can actually watch the podcast and watch me and my guests interact. Now today, Al, which we're going to explain why in just a minute, is not on camera. So if you are watching on YouTube, you get to watch me only as I interact with Al. So Al, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. And I'm very excited to discuss all things piracy and content with you.
Yeah, Maria, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the invite.
Awesome. So Al, without further ado, let's explain to the audience why you're not able to be on camera with me today.
Yeah, it's some people feel as though this is overkill, but what we tend to find as a piracy protection agency or copyright protection agency is that the more success we get in terms of taking down infringements and enforcing our clients' IP, the more success we get, the larger the target we paint on our backs, and so we've had to develop numerous ways to sort of obfuscate and to protect our own IP identity and also the identities of our not so much clients, because generally speaking, it's us who people go after, but certainly our employees. So, I mean, it's not meant to be mysterious or anything like that, but we just prefer to keep sort of visual representations of ourselves sort of offline, so to speak, so they can't be exploited or manipulated. And I can speak to many examples of that in the past, whereas as a more naive organization, we were taken advantage of.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's interesting to me. Like I said, when we first got on, I didn't realize obviously the murky world and, the types of the potential, dangers maybe that are associated with this type of industry. But obviously when you're working with people's pocketbooks and, there's people that are making a lot of money from, piracy and so forth, I can see how that could maybe obviously be an issue for you and your privacy and your security and so forth. So I still appreciate that you're on with us on audio. And like I said, for people on YouTube, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or an audio platform if you prefer. So Al, can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this industry and, what you work on day to day?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've been doing this for probably nearly 10 years now. I mean, myself and a couple of business partners originally started off in SEO back in the day in sort of the 2008, 2009, and we were doing a lot of SEO work for clients. And at that time, the internet was still, I mean, it's a different world now, but the internet was still relatively unscathed, shall we say, when it comes to piracy, specifically of e-learning courses, which is what we sort of primarily represent. We do other things as well, but largely our client base is biz ops people, internet marketers, trading forex vendors, et cetera, et cetera. And we were doing SEO for some of these guys. And back in sort of 2010, 2011, a couple of them asked about certain issues with, at the time, file sharing sites, which is a particular type of piracy popping up in Google, and asked us to remove it. And then those became more ubiquitous. And then at a certain point, we sort of pivoted over from SEO to doing this full time around sort of 2013, 2014. Awesome.
And I mean, do you yourself and people on your team, are you lawyers? Like what got you to be able to do something like this?
So we aren't lawyers. We occasionally work with lawyers, but primarily our USP, or unique selling proposition, is, if you will, is that we do everything which lawyers won't do, basically. Okay. I mean, this is very, and that again, that maybe sounds a bit murky, mysterious, and I'm very happy to unpack that. But the nature of protecting IP and protecting copyright is, of course, it is the legal terrain. I mean, primarily that is where it is fought in the courts. But I'm sure I don't need to tell you that can get extremely expensive. I mean, case in point, we actually had an incident ourselves where a competitor of ours last year appropriated illegally some of our own IP, and we ended up suing them in the United States. And this was a very, very simple case, but it ended up costing us $15,000. So I mean, and that's for a simple case. So really, our USP is to do that type of work, but without involving lawyers, without involving the courts, and so as a result, our clients are sort of paying us a fraction of what they would do if they were to go down those traditional means.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, anytime you get a lawyer involved and you have to go into litigation, the cost just skyrocket. And it just, a lot of times it deters people from actually taking action because they're like, well, if this is going to cost me $50,000 to $100,000, like, how is this, going to make any sense for me and so forth. So I'm just wondering, just to kind of niche down a little bit, like you said, you're working mainly with digital content. So anybody who has a digital content product, we call them info products. They could be called a whole bunch of different things. But, for smaller merchants, merchants that are doing, 100K, 250K, do they have also the same opportunities, let's say, to work with you? Is it cost effective to work with you? Or is this really, the piracy fight, call it, mainly reserved to merchants at a certain revenue scale?
No, I mean, I would say that if someone is starting out in the space, is just sort of on the first rung, there's probably more important things to worry about than piracy. But I do think once you reach a certain level, then it becomes, well, certainly, and I can only really speak on behalf of our clients from what they've told us, but it certainly becomes more of a priority. And it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of a seven-figure business owner or whatever. We have plenty of clients who we would consider to be in that bracket, which you talked about, sort of 100 to 250, K a year or whatever. I mean, we don't really have standardized rates, if we will, and I'm not really interested in publicizing our services, so I'd much rather speak about the broader picture. But we often charge a couple of $100 a month. I mean, it really depends on the situation at hand, and it's case by case. But that is affordable for most people of a sort of a certain level.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, to use any type of service, you gotta have some sales. Typically a mid-tier merchant is doing 100 to 250,000. That's the range. That's the merchant account range that we use usually for underwriting. So that's why I gave that example. Is we do have a lot of merchants and a lot of people who are in that range, which is a significant amount of money. But a lot of times they're worried. Well, $100,000 or $200,000 in legal fees is just not going to happen, so they don't pursue these types of things. But since obviously you have an affordable solution, this is something that they can look into. Do you offer a type of service where people can sign up to you and you can advise them of issues? Or is it more like when somebody's reacting to finding their product copied or their marketing copied, they contact you?
It's more of the latter. I mean, we haven't really had an instance where someone has looked for advice which they would implement themselves, because it's not just a question of a cost in terms of money, it's also time. I mean, this is certainly if you're on sort of the high level, and we have clients who have sort of 200, 300 products, an entire catalog. Enforcing that yourself is hugely time consuming. I mean, it's not just a full-time job; it's a full-time job times 5 or 10. I mean, there's so many plates to keep on spinning. So I don't think people are really prepared to. I mean, we'd be happy to talk to people for free, quite frankly, about what they can do. But in terms of actually implement it, I mean, it's a different kettle of fish entirely. I mean, we have an entire software platform which we've built over many years, which takes care of things and a full scale team. So replicating that yourself is tricky. But primarily, it's people reacting, or those people who have experienced this type of piracy before. They're the ones who know that a proactive response is probably more important.
Yeah. So you're basically scouring the internet to finding any, like, merchants can hire you or offer owners can hire you just to scour the internet to see if there's anybody that's copying, just as a preventative measure, as well as obviously once it's found, then you can help obviously take those offers down, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what we tend to describe ourselves as doing is 3 stages. We scan, we take down, and we report. Okay. So it's and those are sort of three three very separate instances of what we do. We find infringements, we take action against those infringements, and then we report results.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of, offer owners and so forth, where I hear about this a lot is, merchants in the US, a lot of times on popular like affiliate platforms like ClickBank and Digistore and all these types of platforms where people can see the popular offers, they get their offers ripped off. And oftentimes it's ripped off and translated into another language. How do you, for example, let's say you have a US merchant with, an English offer and it gets ripped off in Spanish or Portuguese or anything like that. Do you find that if where the piracy is occurring is not in the States or UK or kind of, Western Europe, what kind of things can you do, obviously high level, when somebody's in like Brazil or somewhere that, doesn't necessarily follow US jurisdictions and laws?
It's a good question because, when a lot of people speak about copyright protection, piracy protection, they always cite the DMCA, which is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And it's always this, everyone always talks about this mythical DMCA, which is a US-based law. Now, yes, there are treaties with other countries, et cetera, but I feel that the people place far too a big emphasis, shall we say, on the DMCA because it is just US law, and enforcing it in, as your example, Brazil. Yes, there are treaties. So in terms of hypothetically, could it be enforced? Yes, but realistically, no. So we have different approaches when it comes to infringements hosted in different countries. Just as a super basic example, we would pull it from, in your example, pull from Brazilian law and follow that. But again, a lot of these individuals have obfuscated their identities very well. So they don't necessarily care about the laws in their own country because they might be living in Brazil and hosted in China. So what we've done over the years is, and this is a really needs must, is that we've become more than just a copyright protection agency. And this is sort of, again, our own USP. We've become essentially an enforcement agency. So often what we do in cases where, for example, multiple clients are affected, we have literally boots on the ground team working with our online investigators to actually source the identities of these individuals. And once we find who they are, we have someone go around to their house, knock on their door, and pay them a visit and say, stop it. And we tend to find, and this is not every instance, but we tend to find that if we do that and when we do that, the fact that their online identity is being penetrated usually, scares the bejesus out of them. And we tend to see far more effective results than, say, a strongly worded letter. So that's sort of one example of one of the more sort of creative tactics we employ.
Wow. Getting somebody to knock on your door. We're in a digital world. So it's, and even in social media, people insult each other and say a whole bunch of stuff and whatever, but having, somebody actually show up at your door is usually unheard of. So this is definitely, something that I'm surprised about that you guys do, which is awesome because, like you said, somebody showing up at your door, and it doesn't even have to be law enforcement, right? Just somebody knowing that, you live there and you're doing this. This is scary enough for most, and will make them take things down and so forth. And is there a limitation to the geography of, where the piracy is occurring? Like, would you say, like, if it's in, do you deal with specifically like South American, or let's say if somebody's in China or some more difficult countries to enforce? Does that pose a bigger challenge?
Yeah, different territories present, shall I say, different challenges. Certainly China would and is tricky. Primarily the biggest barrier is whether we have sort of a team in place, shall we say, within that country. So Vietnam, believe it or not, is where almost 70 or 80% of our focus is. I don't know why, but Vietnam has the most amount of reseller piracy. Why I can talk about what reseller piracy is in a second, but essentially it's websites which are vast repositories of e-learning courses, info courses, which are being sold for pennies on the dollar. So a $2,000 course being sold for $47. Hugely profitable industry, which has just exploded over the past couple of years. And because Vietnam is such a hotbed of this, we've had to develop a team there, shall we say. I mean, it really is case by case. We're not always going around knocking on people's doors. It really depends on the situation at hand. I mean, one example I always like to cite is there was a Vietnamese pirate, a number of years ago, and we did some research. We actually found out he was a policeman in I can't remember where. It was a province somewhere in central Vietnam. So we actually wrote a letter in Vietnamese, and we didn't write the letter to him. We wrote it to his boss and essentially explained what he was doing. And then we sent that letter to him and said, look, this is what we're going to send to your boss if you don't stop it. And of course he did. Now we've got this. He actually disappeared a couple of years ago, but for a time we had that letter sort of holding over his head, and he was always very compliant. So it really depends on the situation at hand, and as our response is dictated.
Well, I also have to say that I now understand, Al, why, going back to our first question of like why you need to conceal your identity. There must be a lot of people that are very upset with you. So you and your team. So it's obvious that you guys kind of go above and beyond and are creative in certain ways to get that done. Once the person takes down the content, is that usually the goal? Is there ever any times where there can be financial compensation or, for example, like you said, in Taiwan, they're ripping off these courses, they're selling them for pennies to the dollar of what they're worth. Have you ever kind of encountered a situation where a merchant or an offer owner wanted to sue somebody and actually, got some money back, or were you able to recoup any kind of funds for them?
I mean, there have been multiple opportunities where clients have, angrily wanted to sue, but we've never had a situation where anyone actually followed through, because that actually, like I said, we do everything lawyers don't do. But when you actually want to sue someone, that involves a legal team, and it involves expense, and quite considerable expense if you're operating outside the US, and the US is obviously expensive. But when you're dealing with sort of Vietnam and the chances to be ripped off by some less salubrious lawyer, et cetera, and just the time as well. When we've broken it down to people, they very quickly decide not to proceed that way. I suspect at some point someone might do, but whether it would be cost effective or not, I don't know.
Is there anything like, maybe 2 or 3 things that you can think of that merchants and offer owners can do to prevent their offer being, copied or pirated?
I mean, it's tricky. I mean, this is something which people always ask, and I wish I had a great answer which locks everything down and secures things. But again, we really only have our clients' experience to go by. I mean, people have tried numerous different things. People have tried only delivering content physically. But what happens is then that gets scanned and then distributed around. We've had people using sort of watermarking software, et cetera, but it's all very well finding out who has leaked it. Generally speaking, that they're using a burnable email and a burnable identity, so there's only limited value there. So it's one of those rather unhelpful answers where there's not so much you can do. I mean, there's obvious things such as using a platform which distributes content securely. We have had instances where clients have been using, say, for example, unsecured file sharing links to distribute premium content, which is madness, quite frankly. But I'm sure that most people who are operating at a certain level understand, to use a codified platform which allows for sort of secure distribution. Having a response team in place to respond to instances quickly rather than letting things snowball, because piracy is an exponential beast. Sure. 1 becomes 2, and 2 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 1,000 very, very quickly. So really, those are the 2 things, and I really wish there was more people could do. I mean, the one thing which would change things is if the internet was regulated. That would change things massively, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Yeah,
the internet regulation, free speech, and so forth. That's like a huge topic, and I mean, it'll come with good and bad. That's the issue, right? That'll come with more censorship, but it'll come with more protection. So it's a catch-22, I think, either way, right? In terms of we're talking about like software and education and so forth. There's that piracy, people actually ripping off the actual product. What's your experience with marketers who get their actual offer copy, not necessarily the product copied, but literally how they're selling, what they're selling, the actual sales copy pirated. Is that simpler to take down? Is that as easy or hard? Like, what are your thoughts on like the actual, marketing of the offer being copied?
Well, it can be simpler, but it also can be harder. And I'll break those two things down for you. One of the reasons it can be simpler is, generally speaking, people who are plagiarizing sales content, if you will, are generally speaking people who are obviously presenting their own offer. And usually those people are in a similar territory. So, for example, the USA or maybe Europe or so on and so forth. It's unlikely that they're going to be in Vietnam, for example.
Sure.
It's so, and the DMCA is quite easy to enforce in the United States. So that's one reason it could be easier, just the enforcement angle, emailing the hosting company to get the content taken down is an easier process than say chasing people through the countryside of Vietnam. On the other hand, plagiarization is distinct from info product piracy in that the gray area is larger. So, when someone rips off an info product, it's pretty blatant. The entire course gets copied. It's being sold for pennies on the dollar. The infringement is pretty obvious. When it comes to sales page plagiarization, any form of rewriting, shall we say, dilutes the case. So it really is a question of how much of the content is being copied. Of course, if the entire sales page is being ripped off word for word, it's an open and shut case. But if it's been rewritten, say for example, it's sort of 50% similar, then it becomes tricky because where is the bar for plagiarization? And it really comes down to really case by case with the hosting company. So that's where it could be potentially harder.
Okay. So, and how about in the situation of it being translated? I mean, how do you, when something's translated, how do you say, well, this is the exact same offer, this is different? There could be different types of translations, dialects, and so forth.
We haven't had that many instances of this. And we have had a few over the years. And actually, all of those have been resolved reasonably easily because, again, what we tend to find, what we have found in the past with translation, it is a translation. It's not a rewriting at all. It really is just a translation of the original text. So that is the same text. It's just in a different language. So okay. that for me, that for us hasn't been a problem. I mean, again, it's really a question of either dealing with the individual in question or dealing with the hosting company and presenting a convincing argument. And that there are ways which you can do that which are better than others. And it really just comes down to making a lot of mistakes, which is what we did in the early days when it came to sort of dealing with foreign hosting companies. But we now have relationships in place for a lot of these as well, and that does make things easier.
Okay. And do you find, I mean, in terms of the offers and the offer owners that you work with, are these people usually having their courses and their content on platforms like affiliate network platforms and stuff like that? Or are they just kind of individualistic offers? The reason that I ask is I hear a lot about this on platforms like ClickBank and some of the other bigger ones, where the top performing offers, like I said earlier, they get ripped off quite easily. Is that something common that you see as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our clients use affiliate marketing as a primary sales driver. That doesn't make a lot of difference to us as to how we respond. I mean, really, what we say is the more popular your course is in terms of sales, the more piracy you're going to experience. I mean, it should be an obvious correlation. Some people don't quite see it, but I mean, the more popular your course is, the more it's selling, the more people are going to sort of jump on your coattails and try and leverage your own success for their own gain, essentially turning you into your own competitor. So, I mean, it is almost a backhanded compliment, if you will. I mean, not a lot of people see it that way, but the more piracy you experience, the chances are the more sales.
Obviously, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But at the end of the day, if your course of $9.97 is now being sold for $47, I think it's not necessarily something that people want to see. Are most of you were saying 70% are in Vietnam? Are most of the other ones kind of peppered around the world, or is there another big region that you're seeing this occur?
No, there really isn't any sort of centralized hub similar to Vietnam. I mean, really other cases are dotted around the world. I mean, the piracy landscape is constantly evolving. And as I said, this reseller industry is hugely profitable. I mean, back in the day, there were only really 3 reseller sites. Again, a reseller site is sort of a single website which has a vast repository of pirated e-learning courses, which they're selling for pennies on the dollar. I mean, now we're adding sort of 6 to 8 new reseller sites every week. We have nearly 2,000 in our database. I mean, last year these guys started advertising because there's an ROI in it. And recently we've actually seen certain individuals, believe it or not, I mean, I find this incredible, but certainly individuals in the USA going on YouTube, making videos of their own face, saying that they're selling these courses themselves. And but there's almost like an air of legitimacy right now, because there's so many of these websites out there, and they look very professional. They have shop fronts, etc., etc. They've almost passed the point where they've forgotten what they're doing is illegal. I mean, it obviously makes things a lot easier for us if someone's posting their own face on YouTube, but it's just interesting that it's reached that point that, you know, it's gone beyond sort of illegality, certainly in their eyes, because it's just something which they do.
They've normalized it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you were talking earlier, like 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, it kind of mushrooms into a bigger problem. Do you find that if a merchant or offer owner kind of nips it in the bud right at the beginning, does it usually kind of slow down, or is this a constant kind of battle to like you constantly have to be watching this, versus if you kind of nip it in the bud at the beginning, it kind of starts getting better, I guess, or less common that your content gets pirated?
It's both. If you do nip it in the bud earlier, there is a very good chance that things will slow. But as we always say, new and replacement infringements are an inevitability if your product is selling and is popular. Now, it's just a lot of our clients have reached the point where they just understand that this is the cost of doing business. Enforcing their IP, protecting their IP is similar to their email provider or hosting company. It's just the nature of protecting your content on an unregulated internet. That said, getting in there early, nipping into the bud can in a lot of cases avoid sort of this mushrooming effect. And we've had clients come to us who have been hadn't dealt with this problem for sort of years, and we end up taking down 20 or 30,000 infringements within sort of the space of a couple of months, just to just to regain some sort of status quo. I mean, those are the extreme situations where someone has a catalog of 30 products which they've never protected. But usually our clients who have been with us a number of years understand the value of getting in there early. So prior to their offer being released, that they'll add their products to the protected product list, so we can jump on stuff pretty quickly, and that does tend to help. But at the same time, new and replacement infringements will pick up if your products are popular and are selling. It's just unfortunately the nature of things.
And do you find it's the same, like when you take somebody down, do you have a lot of circumstances where you see it's the same pirate that's doing it over and over again? Or are you pretty successful, like once they get, taken down, that they just stop?
It's the individuals who often operate in sort of groups. So again, it's quite a large scale organization. These resellers. I mean, again, we don't know everything because, of course, it is a dark and murky world. But having tracked these guys for a number of years, the same bad actors do pop up again and again. Now, when it comes to our relationship with them, if you can even call it a relationship, that they are very aware of who we are, and we're strategic about it. I mean, this may not sort of be the best approach morally, but we say to them, look, we won't take your whole website down, but you've got to remove our clients' products. Now, again, that is probably an approach which is far from ideal, but at the end of the day, we're only enforcing the IP and copyright of our clients, and that is our priority. We would love to be the white knight, if you will, and to take down the whole site, but that is an infinitely more complex operation and infinitely more expensive. So we have to be strategic. So I mean, we tend to find that these guys comply with us, but it doesn't mean that they cease all activity.
Okay, so usually when they copy an offer, they go away, they copy another offer, or do you find that they just find another way to rejig it and copy it again, like a month later? Are you kind of, I don't know. I picture you having maybe like a list of like, these are my common offenders. So I'm going to see if these are the guys that are the hit list of, are they the ones kind of doing it? Is that accurate? Or do you find that you're always kind of having to kind of look out of the box?
I mean, we have a lot of plates which keep on spinning. I mean, there are a number of ways to answer that, because new sites are appearing all the time, and they tend to follow the same pattern if they're not familiar with who we are and what we do. So, one of the common tactics is, we send sort of a new reseller site who's never operated in the space before, doesn't really know what they're doing, takedown notice, and they remove the offer, remove the products, and then they quietly repost it sort of a couple of weeks later and hope we don't notice. Now, of course, we do notice because we're very familiar with this tactic. So we are constantly rescanning links which we've removed to see if they've been reposted or posted in a different form on that particular site. I mean, it's a huge operation. So we're rescanning tens of millions of links every day. And generally what we find is these new guys, when they realize we're doing that, then they stop reposting. But then, of course, a new site will come up and employ a different tactic. So, it's an evolving landscape, and it really depends, what type of reseller they are, how long they've been doing it, and how fastidious they are. I mean, there are individuals who fight us, and in the end they give up because we are more tenacious than them. They're trying to run a business. Our single focus is to do this, and we are happy to spend hours and hours a day fighting them. But it's for them, it's the cost of it.
They're losing, yeah.
Exactly.
They're losing their time for their business. So I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of them have like a signature, right? Like thieves have a signature and so forth. So you've been doing this for long enough that you can probably even recognize, one of these outfits kind of typical signature, the way that they do things or the way that the site is built. Yeah.
I mean, they are crafty to a degree, but I mean, they do recycle, for example, sort of payment emails, et cetera, et cetera. So we obviously have a database where we're able to cross-reference and we're able to group individuals. I mean, one individual could be running sort of 10 10 sites. And we can see that just in terms of different factors which correlate the individual websites. I mean, one of the new developments is the advance of crypto. Previously, I mean, a lot of them were using PayPal accounts and burnable PayPal accounts, and we had a good relationship with PayPal's infringement departments. We could get stuff removed quite quickly, but now they're aware of that. They've been pivoting to crypto payments, et cetera, and the crypto industry aren't really on top of this yet. Even large organizations like Coinbase don't understand what a reseller site is. So, I mean, I've actually got a call scheduled with them, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, just to try and explain to them just what is going on here, because it's not sort of front of mind for them. Coin payments, et cetera, et cetera. But then, of course, you've got decentralized payment gateways, which are more problematic because there's really nothing to remove because they're decentralized. And again, that is something which has really only just come up in the past, frankly, couple of months. We're only at the point of developing a response to that, and that's going to be a challenge, no doubt. But we faced challenges before.
Yeah, I mean, crypto, I didn't know we were going to get there. Crypto is a topic that we discuss a lot on the podcast. And, as much as it facilitates and it helps kind of improve commerce and so forth as you're able to trade, a lot of people are, who use crypto don't, I'm assuming people who are copying content and pirates and so forth are not using, systems like Coinbase and so forth. They're using maybe more decentralized or more anonymous ways of buying their crypto and trading it and so forth. So I see that obviously that's going to be a very, very big challenge and might make things a little bit more difficult. But obviously you guys have been doing this for a really long time and very successfully. So I'm sure that, you will have the best tools for all marketers and content producers and so forth. So Al, I mean, this was super eye-opening. I didn't realize, the complexity of this issue and how big it is. But we do get a lot of marketers that complain about this, and just people that I talk to in the space. So I think that they're going to find this information very, very valuable. Do you have any last thoughts or anything, any other cool things you want to tell us before we close off?
I mean, there's so much I could say. I mean, there's been so many stories over the years. I mean, I suppose the one thing I always hark back to is that it is an evolving world, and if we had this conversation in sort of 2 or 3 months, we'd be talking about sort of different challenges and different ways people are being exploited, and things are changing all the time. So it's really a question of, from our perspective, trying to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of that. And yeah, that is what we do day in, day out.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Al, again, thank you so much for your time. And we might have that conversation in a couple of months. You know, as crypto continues evolving and becoming more popular, it could be an interesting angle to hear more about your thoughts on that. So I thank you so much for your time. For everybody listening, like I said, you can listen to us on audio. And if you're on YouTube, I apologize for me being the only person here. But because of Al's obviously role, he was unable to be on camera. I'm going to have some links down below for everybody listening on how you can get in touch with Al and look at Takedown Czar. And if you have any questions for me as well that I can relay to Al, I'd be happy to do that. Again, please like and share this episode, and we thank you for listening. Hope you found today's session valuable. If you have any questions for me or just want to connect, please feel free to visit my website, mariasparagis.com. That's mariasparagis.com. I'd love to hear what you're working on, so drop me a line on any hot button issues your business is experiencing. And remember, don't worry about failure. You only have to be right once.